who are not able to be with us live and who really wanted to be here for this call. So welcome to all of you. My name is Rabbi Lea Mühlstein. I am the chair of Arzenu. I'm also a congregational rabbi at the IRAC synagogue in London, but currently on sabbatical from there. So at the moment I am in Israel. I thought when I thought about my sabbatical, I would come for 3 relaxing months of just sitting around reading books in Israel. And then I arrived in Israel as, it started a long time before, but really as the current crisis hit its peak, maybe let's put it like this. So it's a real privilege for us to be able to offer this seminar and to have wonderful guest speakers. With us first is going to be our surprise guest. So real privilege, Rabbi Gilad Kariv. With us, your rabbi, but of course for everyone else in the streets, member of Knesset, Gilad Kariv. It's a real privilege to have you with us. I have to share, I think, one of my favorite things of the protests that happened a few weeks ago was you and I were mad enough to stay overnight in a tent in Gan Saker. And there was, for those of you who are not aware, there was a big protest march on Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, and really thousands and thousands of people joined. And then in the night before the critical vote, and we'll be speaking more about that vote during this call, in the 2 nights leading up to that, there was a camp in the garden, the park underneath the Knesset. It was incredible. And for me, one of the highlights of being in that park was I was just walking through. I didn't know that Gilad was also mad and staying the night. And suddenly I see Gilad, and what was the most wonderful thing was he was surrounded by lots of young people. And I think that was, for me, one of the things that really gave me hope. And just listening of how other people were coming by and they were like, this is Gilad Kariv, remember? It gave me hope. So Gilad, it's really a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for finding time. You're super busy. Maybe you can kick us off to just share what have these last 31 weeks been like as an insider inside the halls of the Knesset. And maybe if you could also share with us if you have something hopeful to say about what's going on as well. So Gilad, over to you. I think, Gilad, we accidentally muted you. I apologize.
Okay. So friends, חברים, חברות, שלום to you all. בוקר טוב, צהריים טובים, ערב טוב. It's wonderful to be here with you, and thank you, Rabbi Lea, for the invitation to join this important IMPJ Arzenu webinar. I just finished another webinar with a wonderful group of North American rabbis led by ARTSA and the CCAR, together with colleagues from Israel. I'm always amazed by the desire of our colleagues and partners from around the world to know more, to learn more, to engage more, and to be able to lead your congregants and members and friends in helping us to protect Israeli. It's not a given thing for me and for us. Leah, I marked the fact that you don't think I'm young anymore. I was only surrounded by youngsters, but okay. I embrace
I also didn't consider myself young enough anymore. They were really
true.
youngsters.
That's true. Look, friends, the truth is that in this webinar you have two brilliant experts about what is happening in Israel. Ori Narov, who leads the Israeli Religious Action Center, together with her colleague Ori Narov, the head of our legal department, of IRAC's legal department. So allow me not to go into the details of this judiciary coup or the legal reform in the way the coalition and the government present it. I do want to share with you few short thoughts and remarks. The first has to do with this moment and the need to understand that indeed this is a critical moment in the history of Israel. You know, I'm not ignoring the fact that we, the politicians, we tend to present everything as critical because this is part of our political match. And in the end, the opposition has a tendency always to present the work of the government and the coalition as a real danger for the future of our country. And I'm not ignoring this political regular behavior, yet I do want to say that this is indeed a critical moment. And in many ways, this is an unprecedented moment in the history of Israel. It's not the first time we faced internal debates and even battles. Definitely, there are major ideological challenges for the liberal camp in Israel, and this is not the first one that we have to face. Yet, I'm calling all of us to understand that having hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets for more than 6 months, this for itself tells us something important about how serious the current situation is. Now, it is true that this political, social, cultural, ideological crisis is fully branded with the judiciary coup and with the desire of the current government and coalition to change the relations between the three branches of government and to restructure the Israeli system of checks and balances in a way that we believe might destroy this, or probably destroys this system. And it's good that the issue of the judiciary reform caught the intention of the Israeli public and the intention of the global community, especially in the Western world, because in the end, we need people to understand the threat. But it is also important that we Israelis and you, our partners from overseas, that we will all understand that it's much bigger than the relations between the different branches of government. Now, by definition, there is a limit to, the list of items that we can refer to as citizens of Israel. Definitely, there is a limit to how many headlines from Israel you can read in your countries. This is also the case with the Jewish global media and the general global media. They cannot address all the different pieces of legislation that our government is pushing forward. But we, and especially we, as progressive liberal reform leaders, we need to understand that this is bigger than the judiciary coup. And we need to understand that aside to the legal front, there are at least two other very important fronts that we need to address or to watch carefully. One has to do with us directly, and that's the front of religion and state relations in Israel. And we need to understand that there is a concrete effort of the governing coalition to push back our achievements from the last 30 years and to legislate in an unprecedented way the Orthodox monopoly, more than it already exists in the Israeli legislation. And the other front has to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that's the attempt to create a de facto annexation in the territories. Now, those three fronts and many other fronts that we don't have the time to explore, maybe Ori and Ori can give more examples, are all connected. And I will even allow myself to say that while the government and the coalition meet many obstacles in their way to implement the judiciary reform because of the protest, in the other fronts, they are moving quite rapidly. And for good reasons, the attention of the opposition, the attention of the Israeli media, the attention of the Israeli public in the streets is focusing on the judicial reform. But we really need to remember that it didn't start with the judiciary coup, and it will not end with restructuring the relations between Israel's parliament, the Knesset, the government, and the court. And this is a real battle over the core values and mechanisms of the Israeli democracy. It is important to remember, and in a minute I will also share with you some hopes and optimistic analysis, but it is important to know and to identify the fact that this is not only a democratic moment in Israel. This is also a profound Jewish and Zionist moment in Israel, because in many ways, the current political battle will have a huge impact not only on the strength of Israel's democracy, but also on the face of Zionism and Israeli Judaism in the 21st century. And again, here we need to follow the wisdom of the crowd and to see the way this magnificent and amazing civil protest embraced two leading symbols. One is the blue and white flag, and the other is Israel's Declaration of Independence. And those two symbols are, of course, connected also to the Israeli democratic sovereignty, but they are mainly Zionist and Jewish symbols. And I think that for the first time in many decades, the liberal, progressive, secular, non-Orthodox, democratic camp in Israel is trying to reclaim the Zionist vocabulary and the ownership of Israeli Judaism. Now, after many years of neglecting those narratives, this cultural foundation of our society, it's not an easy return. This is definitely only the first steps of this huge turn that our liberal audience in Israel is taking, but it tells us something about our role in this moment, because for many years, the Israeli movement for progressive and reform Judaism, our rabbis, our communities, we were the ones, together with some other partners like the Israeli Masorti movement and other players, but we were the leading voice. And just think about the work of the Israeli Religious Action Center. We were the ones that said that without offering the Israelis an inclusive, open-minded, egalitarian, tolerant version of Judaism, Israel's democracy will be at risk. And we need to play a very important role today in helping a much bigger audience that we ever had to do this move of reclaiming Zionist vocabulary, Jewish vocabulary, Jewish narratives, and we need to take a lead in that regard. And it is definitely a moment of crisis, but for us, and I'm talking about Israelis, but I'm talking about also about you, our overseas partners. This is also a moment of opportunity. It leads me to my two final thoughts and remarks. The first has to do with your role. And here I want to repeat an answer I gave to a question that was presented to me in the previous webinar with our North American colleagues. And one of the rabbis said, what should be our answer to those that suggest that we should not interfere with Israel's domestic issues? In the end, Israel is democracy. People went and voted, and this is a legitimate government, and we are not claiming that it was not elected in a legitimate way. This is a legitimate government. Its actions are not legitimate, but the government itself is, of course, some of its actions are not legitimate, but the government for itself, this is the government that the Israeli voters chose. But what is the answer to those that suggest we should not interfere? And what is the answer to those that say, I had enough with Israel? And there are three answers to those who suggest that those are Israel's domestic issues. I'm begging you to remember the involvement of the ultra-conservative, ultra-traditional, ultra-nationalist Jewish forces from diaspora communities in the work of the Israeli extreme right. Some of you are aware to the involvement of the Kohelet think tank in this judiciary coup, and the way that it was actually launched by the support of North American ultra-conservative Jews. But leave aside Forum Kohelet, I reminded my North American colleagues 30 minutes ago that Meir Kahana, you know, the leader of the Kahanist groups, didn't grow up in Israel, didn't grow up in Israel. He made Aliyah from North America. And I'm telling you that the settlement movement and the ultra-right political forces and the ultra-Orthodox parties are well supported and inspired by Jewish groups from overseas. And we cannot allow ourselves to sit aside while they are interfering in those issues. The second answer I want to share with you has to do with what Reform Zionism is all about. Many years before Zionism dealt with actually building a state, Zionism was the theology, ideology, and theory that Judaism is not only a community of faith, it's also a nation, a people, an extended family. And we know about the original debates between Reform rabbis and the leaders of our movements in the 19th century and the leaders of Zionism. And if there is one thing that Zionism donated to our way of understanding what Judaism is all about, is this understanding that it's not only religion, it's also a national culture. And a nationality and the sense of peoplehood is all about arvut adadit, is all about this concept that I'm responsible to the well-being of my brothers and sisters, even if I don't live with them in the same house. And the third answer, which is for me the most important one, is to say to our colleagues and friends that this is not a domestic issue, because the current development in Israel will have a huge impact on the well-being of Jewish life overseas, and especially outside North America, especially in Europe, in Australia, in South Africa, in South America, in the Far East, in the smaller Jewish communities. And already today, Israel is exporting its Orthodox monopoly. When half of the Jews live today in Israel, the way we understand Israeli Judaism will have a huge impact on the well-being of a diaspora Jewry, and especially on the well-being of non-Orthodox Jewish communities in the diaspora. So it is not a domestic issue. It's a global Jewish issue, and we need to address it as a global Jewish issue. And in regard to those who ask or say, I had enough with Israel, we can give them a very short answer. The sweetest dream of the ultra-Orthodox parties in Israel and the ultra-nationalist, racist Jewish forces in Israel is to have the liberal, progressive, reform, conservative Jews around the world say, we had enough with Israel. That's their plan. And I don't think we need to explain why there is no good reason for us to work for them or to help them to implement their dream. My last remark is, and again, this is a good segue to my great friends and partners from the IMPJ and IRAC, is to say that this is indeed a moment of crisis, but as I said, it's a moment of great hope. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are in the streets for more than 6 months. This is not only an unprecedented civil protest in Israeli terms, this is also an unprecedented democratic protest in international and global terms. I'm telling you that there are parliament members from European countries that are flying to Israel to learn from the Israeli protest and the way that it is organized. We are writing today a very important global textbook to how to lead democratic, civil, wide protest against an attempt to shrink democracy, to make it a very narrow version of democracy in the way we understand it. And this is really a moment of a democratic resilience in Israel. And I have a very strong belief that in spite the fact that we are losing some battles, we will be able to win the general war. It's not maybe the best term, but the general and the overall effort to secure the future of Israeli democracy and to secure the future of the way we understand what Zionism is all about. Leah, back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gilad, for everything you do, for being with us today. I know you have to step away, but there will be other people on this call who will be able to answer some follow-up questions, I'm sure. And if there are some urgent follow-up questions for Rabbi Gilad Kariv, I'm sure we'll manage to get an answer offline afterwards as well. So thank you very much for being with us. Shana Tova, yes. It's almost Elul.
Yes. Bye, friends.
Thank you, Gilad. Bye. So following that, we wanted to give you an opportunity. When we invited for this webinar, we said no prior knowledge required. So we did want to make sure that we had someone with us who could really help us in understand what is actually going on, because a lot of people, I think, are a little bit confused. What is this all about? The reasonableness clause, why does it matter so much? So we have with us this evening Ori Narov, who's the head of the legal department of the Israel Religious Action Center, a wonderful lawyer who's fighting in the courts on behalf of the values that we deeply care for, but also really somebody who will be able to explain to us what is going on. So Ori, thank you so much also to you for all the hard work you're doing, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me this evening. Well, and I must say that it's very, very nice to see so many familiar faces this evening. So hi to you all. So I'm going to start. I know that probably most of you, or even all of you, know what IRAC is, but I will start with just a few, two or three sentences about IRAC, if I may. So the Israel Religious Action Center, as you know, is the both public and legal advocacy arm of the Reform movement, and we have been for the past 36 years. Have been working to protect and advance democratic values in Israel in order to keep Israel both Jewish and democratic state, and to advance more just, egalitarian Israeli society. So we've been fighting to advance freedom from religion and off religion, and in that sense ensuring state recognition and equal status for reform, conservative rabbis, synagogues, institutions, and so on and so forth, and advance equality in the frame of fighting against gender segregation, exclusion of women in the public sphere, fighting against racism. Now, since the establishment of this current government, which is definitely by far the most racist, the most anti-democratic, the most extreme right-wing government in the history of the state of Israel, our main aim is to defend Israeli democracy, which is, well, I can't put it any other way, but it's under constant and massive attack. So on January 4th, our justice minister introduced the Israeli public with a set of these proposed bills under the frame of a collective so-called reform regarding Israel's judicial system. And once this judicial reform is approved by the Knesset, it will definitely suffocate the independence of the judiciary. We will no longer have the separation of powers among the branches of government, and it will actually eliminate the rule of law. Now, I want to give you an overview of the main parts of this judicial coup and where these proposed bills currently stand. So there are five major parts of this proposed bill. The first one regards striking down unconstitutional legislation. So according to the proposed bills, a law could be struck down only by panel that includes all 15 Supreme Court justices. That has never been done before. And also 80% of the justices will have to agree in order to strike down a law. And I'm talking about regular laws. When it comes to basic laws, they will not be invalidated at all. So it will be very, very difficult, if not impossible, for the Supreme Court to invalidate a law, and it will be completely impossible to strike down a basic law, even if this basic law undermines the very basic values of democracy, as we see that is happening now. So this proposed bill was submitted for a first reading in the Knesset plenum and approved, and now it awaits to be voted on in second and third readings, which usually take place in succession. So that can be done very, very rapidly, unfortunately. The second part of this overall is the override clause. So it will be possible to override a Supreme Court decision to strike down a law if a simple majority of 61 members of Knesset vote to do so. Now, the government obviously is supported by a majority of MK, so it can definitely easily nullify any Supreme Court decision that it disagrees with. This law also passed in first reading in the Knesset plenum. The third part is the government will not be bound by the legal opinion of the Attorney General. So the government and its ministers will not be obligated to accept the position of the Attorney General or the position of the legal advisors of the government ministries. And as far as I know, this part has not been approved yet. The fourth part is regards the judicial nominations will be controlled by politicians. So the current situation in Israel is that there is a committee that selects the judges in Israel. Now, this committee balances various interests. So it includes coalition, opposition politicians, judges, members of Israel's bar. Now, under this proposed legislation, it will give complete control to the government. So Supreme Court justices will be also elected by a regular majority. So if the government has 5 members of the committee, they will be able to nominate also Supreme Court justices according to their wishes. This also passed in first reading in the Knesset plenum. Now, the fifth part, which Rabbi Lea mentioned, is removing Supreme Court's ability to intervene in response to unreasonable government decisions. Unfortunately, this part of the judicial coup has just recently been enacted into law, and that means that the Supreme Court cannot declare anymore that a government or a minister's decision is unreasonable and strike it down on that particular ground. Now, in order to determine what is or not reasonable, the court reviews if all relevant considerations have been taken into account before government or this specific minister reached the decision, and if each consideration was given the proper weight. I'll give you an example. The government's decision not to initiate disciplinary proceedings against Rabbi Shmuel, which, if you are subscribed to our mailing list, you probably are familiar with the name. So if they decide not to take disciplinary action for expressing public racist remarks, let's say against Arabs, then this bill would negate the ability to attack it. So the Supreme Court will no longer be able to invalidate this ministerial decision. So the bottom line is that the government and ministerial decisions will be immune from judicial review on grounds of unreasonableness. Now, yesterday, another petition was submitted by close to 40 civil society organizations to the High Court of Justice against the enactment of this law. And there are other petitions that have already been filed against it, and a hearing will be held with the 15 sitting justices this September 12th. Now, what I want you all to understand is that we have a very fragile democracy. So we have a Knesset, our parliament, that is being controlled by the government, and we only have the Supreme Court that serves as the only form of check on the Knesset's and the government's power. So given the government immunity from judicial review, even if it's only regarding the reasonableness clause, it is bound not to only weaken the Supreme Court, but it simply endangers Israel's democracy. And it is also to understand that the Knesset is currently in recess until, I think, October 15th. But once recess is over and the Knesset convenes again, passing these legislation proposals that I just mentioned, that are included in the set of proposed bills, could be done in no time. So before we know it, they will be enacted into law. Now, I'd like to give you some examples regarding what might happen if this judicial coup will keep on moving forward and the proposed legislation will be enacted into law. For example, Knesset could deny rights of Reform and Conservative Jews, let's say recognition by state of Reform conversions, for instance, or Knesset can curtail voting rights for Arabs, or I don't know, approve gender segregation in public sphere. even though we're talking about decisions that violate basic rights, such as right for human dignity, right for equality. So it would be very, very difficult, and in case of basic laws, even impossible to challenge them. If the Supreme Court is not able to intervene in unreasonable decisions made by the government or government ministers, that means they will have free rein to make any decision, however outrageous. And we as citizens, we have no real effective recourse for judicial oversight. So I don't think there's any precedent in any democracy for a legal system without checks and balances like what these guys in the government are planning for us. And honestly, without the Supreme Court and in the absence, as I mentioned before, of other checks and balances, because we don't have constitution, we don't have a rigid constitution, we don't have two houses of parliament, for example, we don't have a president with a veto power, we're not bound by any international court which we have to adhere to. So this government actually has no restraints, and there will be no protection for human rights. I also want to mention, I think it's very important to mention that besides those laws that I mentioned, there are other laws that are being that they're trying to enact all the time. Since the establishment of this government, we have dozens of really outrageous, anti-democratic, racist law proposals that this government promotes constantly. It's like every week it's like rain coming down on us. So we obviously fight that. We constantly prepare our standpoint and hand the papers to the government ministries, to the Knesset committees, to the everybody that deals with that. Now, I want to give you just two examples. The first one is regarding so that you'll have a taste of what these bills promote. The first one is a bill supported by the Ministers' Legislation Committee, which convenes every Sunday. So every Wednesday for the past couple of months, I've been waiting. What is going to happen this Wednesday? What are they going to publish regarding the agenda that is going to take place in the following Sunday? Because then I have to prepare our standpoint. And there are normally, there used to be between, I don't know, 2, 3, or even 4 new legislation proposals we have to address to. All of them outrageous. So this bill is about giving preference to Israeli citizens that serve in the army or that serve in the national service. They will be prioritized over those who didn't. Up until now, it's, well, reasonable in a way. You can live with that. But the priority they want to give over others who did not serve in the army or go to national service is in the right to receive public services, or in entering into public places, or in getting hired for job as job applicants. So that seriously contravenes with the very, very basic principles of equality and the Israeli laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of irrelevant criteria. So who do you think is going to suffer from this proposed bill if enacted into law? It will obviously work against the 20% Arab minority in in Israel, because normally most of them don't get recruited to the army. And we have this, we see that this is a racist agenda that is being promoted by the government all the time. Now, another bill that has unfortunately passed is a bill that enforces stricter punishment on sex offenders against sexual violence that is committed with a nationalistic motive. Now, the law was claimed to be legislated in order to combat a growing phenomenon, this is how they defined it, a growing phenomenon of nationalist terrorism. Now, one of the MKs who initiated this proposal, she's from the right-wing, extreme right-wing party, Otzma Yehudit, who is identified with Kahana. She specifically stated that this law is aimed at Arabs that sexually harass Jewish women as a way of terrorism against Jews. Now, I want to add that during the deliberations on the specific law in the Knesset committee, state officials said that this alleged type of terrorism has no record at all. And we also argued that this law adopts the racist terminology of Lehava, the racist organization led by Benzi Gopstein. This did not help, unfortunately, and a very, very twisted and racist hierarchy was generated according to which national identity of a rapist and a woman that was raped will affect the severity of the punishment. That this is, in my opinion, protecting our national dignity, not the dignity of the woman who's being harassed or sexually abused. So this is really, really shameful. Now, what I want to say is that what I feel is that there is a general sentiment currently that this is what I feel. There's a general sentiment in the Israeli public that opposes anti-democratic moves, actions, legislation, and that this continued demonstrations and protest against this move that this government is trying to promote has just raised the awareness of Israelis, and this awareness is growing all the time to issues that we at IRAC have been fighting to promote for years. Let's say, for instance, gender segregation in public sphere. So more and more people understand they cannot disregard that anymore, and that they must stand up and they must resist. For example, look at what happened in a Bnei Brak pharmaceutical store that put stickers on her product packages in order to hide women's faces, because that was the demand that they claimed that was the demand of their Bnei Brak customers. So it just evoked such an outrage, protest against it, and eventually they apologized and they changed their course. So this is really encouraging. And I think we all should remember that Israel is a democratic state. It should remain a democratic state. It is the home for all Jews, for everyone. And I think it is our duty as people who live in Israel, and it's your duty as people who don't live here, but who care about Israel. We all have to make our voice heard. We all have to make sure that Israel lives up to its founding principles of democracy, equality, pluralism. And as Gilad said, I think we're going to win this fight eventually. It's just a matter of time, but we are extremely resilient, and this is definitely going to happen. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. And there is already, we said we would take questions afterwards. We have two more speakers, and I want to make sure we have enough time for them in case people really have to jump off at the end of the hour. But we can run a little bit over, especially to answer questions of our wonderful audience here. So thank you very much for your contribution, Ori, for everything you do. And thanks for staying with us so that maybe we can take a few questions at the end as well. It's my pleasure now to welcome as our next panelist, Rabbi Danna Sharon. When I asked how best to introduce her, she said, well, really all you need to say is, I'm a feminist and LGBTQ activist. That's who I've been my whole life. Before I became a rabbi, now as a rabbi. She is a rabbi currently working in one of our Israeli Reform congregation, but just transitioning out of the congregational rabbinate into a new exciting role with Rabbis for Human Rights. And I asked Danna, we know each other, so this is why we're doing the first name thing. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to my wonderful colleagues. When we spoke in advance, I asked her to speak a little bit, both from the perspective of a congregational rabbi and an activist, specifically about kind of the fears and concerns that she has and the communities she also represents with regards to the rights of women, LGBTQ community, but also talk a little bit, Gilad mentioned it also, about this, the taboo word that sometimes happens in these conversations, the occupation. It's a big debate within the, and Danna will probably be able to say something about this, within the protest movement, whether to fully embrace the anti-occupation bloc. They are present at the demonstrations, but as many of you will be aware, for example, the government banned the use of the Palestinian flag. I see my wonderful colleague, Rabbi Lea Mühlstein, has them both hanging beautifully behind her. This is no longer possible, but there is an anti-occupation bloc, but it's a question of debate. So Danna, I'm gonna hand over to you to just share your perspective with us. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you for having me. So yeah, so my perspective, I think, is the perspective of someone who's more boots on the ground. Ori and Gilad kind of gave us the overall of how this looks from the Knesset and from the court walls. But I kind of have, I think, the better overview of what this actually looks like right now for congregation who have for many, many years been struggling for rights and recognition. So what Gilad had mentioned is how, first of all, the first thing that this government is doing is undoing many, many accomplishments of the more liberal governments that had existed before. And this is a legislative blitz, pretty much. They're attacking on all fronts. And what we're seeing, and we are all familiar with the fact that whenever democracy is fragile, whenever society is fragile, minorities, women and children are the first to take the hit. So the big minority groups we are seeing that are taking a major hit is, first of all, women's rights. And Ori had mentioned the issue of gender segregation that we are seeing. First of all, we are seeing some very inappropriate remarks and comments that are being made by government officials about women, about the LGBTQI community. There is, under this pretense of free speech, there's a lot of hate speech that is happening right now, which is already very problematic because, and I think for all of the congregation, I'm taking the liberty to speak on behalf, there is an issue of the public climate that this government is manufacturing. This is something we're seeing very, very vividly in the occupied territories. Rabbis for Human Rights work directly with Palestinian congregations and communities. They are already marginalized, they are already impoverished. And we are seeing that we're seeing this forceps movement where the government is taking legal action against them, but also making it very easy for them to be harmed by Jewish settlers in the occupied territories. Because there's de facto, Gilad was talking about the de facto annexation, and we kind of have first seats to tell you what this de facto annexation looks like. It looks very, very unsavory and very violent. This is already a policy with heads of some major settlements to have people who are living in illegal settlements according to the Israeli law. But that's just this weird little title because nobody does anything to move those settlements away. And at the same time, we're seeing, and we have been, and this is something that has been actually been wide media coverage about the fact that a young Palestinian man was shot by a settler this weekend, which is new and has to do with what Leah has been saying about the fact, and what Ori has been saying about the fact that everything is up in the air right now. The Israeli society is debating things the Israeli society have been doing its best to not be aware of for the longest time. For the longest time, the Israeli society has been doing, and where the Israeli, let's say, secular average person has been doing their best not to be aware of the occupation, not to be aware of minorities' rights, not to be aware of what it actually means to have so many groups that don't share our democratic values in the government, like the Ultra Orthodox, or like some representative of the they call themselves a Tzionut Hadatit, the religious Zionism. I think that's offensive both to Zionism and to the Jewish religion, but that's what they chose. And we're really, really seeing how they are giving this kind of boost to some public sentiments. And at the same time, we're seeing that Leo was talking about the anti-occupation bloc in the protests. We've been around since day one, not carrying the Israeli flag, often carrying rainbow flags, been carrying Palestinian flags until they made it illegal. Now people, I think, are carrying pictures of watermelons. Or you have to say one thing for this demonstration, it's very creative. And kind of trying to own that part of the narrative, because I think, and Gilad and Ori were giving this positive outlook on things, and I appreciate that, and I think that is some of it, but it's not all of it, because I think if this government gets us to stop talking about the occupation completely and only focus on what it's doing, then in some way they've won. I think this is a battle we're very much still fighting, getting everybody to see that this is related and that we can't have human rights only within the 48 borders and only for Jewish. And with the angle of the LGBTQI community, which have also been part of this demonstration since day one, you see a lot of rainbow flags. There was also a debate about that within the LGBTQI plus organizations, whether or not the official organizations should partake rather than single people with their flags, whether we should take a stand, because for a very long time worked for LGBTQI plus organizations was to steer clear of politics, of partisan politics. That allowed us to be much more consensual. And that is actually what promoted, in many ways, the LGBTQI plus rights, because we were considered to be non-political. And that enabled us to kind of fly under the radar a little bit. And this is something that is super political and in many ways super partisan. So there has been a very strong debate, and we are seeing that the more intense the legislation becomes, the more the organizations are joining in. All the LGBTQI plus organizations signed on to the petition about the recent bill that Ori was talking about. And and one last thing I would like to add, because I think we're running out of time, is that we need to also understand that this is the fact that this government is stopping budgets, for example, that were allocated for Arab local authorities and regional counties after years of neglect. It's so destructive to the Israeli society. Oli was talking about promoting the bill that is promoting rights for people who have served national service, for people who are not Jewish in Israel, who are either Muslim, Palestinians, or Christians. I think there's about 200 slots to join national service a year. To those 200 slots, last time I checked, there were about 2,500 people applying. The government just does everything in its power to keep those marginalized communities even more marginalized and to narrow their steps. And that, I think, is a huge problem that we will have to get together and try and figure out with, I hope, with this momentum. And I hope people, and we are seeing, because we are seeing very promising signs about people becoming much more aware, and we are seeing that, yeah, the block against the occupation might not be the largest or the most popular, but they are no longer marginalized. We are hearing more and more speakers. I haven't been to Tel Aviv, but I have been to Jerusalem. We are getting, first of all, slowly but surely, we are getting partners from the Palestinian population in Israel. And we are hearing more and more voices addressing this issue, which is a trend I hope will continue.
Thank you so much.
I didn't talk about women's rights, but it's awful, and
yeah. Sadly, the list of awful and also awful laws that Ori could have mentioned is so long.
What a private policing force that is at the hands of a Itamar Ben-Gvir looks like, and what it means. If you've been with Women of the Wall, you know what it means when you're dealing with a private police that does not have your best interest in heart.
Yeah, so I know we haven't been able to cover it all. It's impossible in the time, but thank you so much for your contribution. I want to pick up on one of the things you mentioned before, as I come to our final speaker. Last but certainly not least, Yair Lootsteen, the chair of the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism. You talked about, Danna, about the fact that the LGBTQ organizations were unsure whether to join the protest movement right from the get-go. Now, Yair, you led a religious movement that also does not define itself as political in the partisan political way, but the decision you took as a movement was different. So start off by telling us, why did you join from day one as the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism? Why did you join from day one, the protest movement? And then talk a little bit about, maybe from a movement, congregational movement perspective, has that always been smooth sailing? Or have you got a little bit of pushbacks at times from board members or members of congregations and so on? Thank you so much, Yair.
So good evening, folks. It's really nice to be here with you, and it's always wonderful to see our friends and supporters from around the world. We heard Gilad speak on the national level, and Gilad is one of my biggest heroes. We heard Ori speak about the legal battles, but not only the legal battles, some of the public policy battles that we're fighting within our movement, with our advocacy branch and our arm at IRAC. We heard from Danna speaking about specific issues regarding Palestinian issues, Israeli issues within the protest movement, and we didn't get to hear it so much about the women's rights, but I want to talk a little bit about where our movement is the IMPJ, and I'll call it the IMPJ. I assume that all of you know that the IMPJ is the Israeli Reform Movement. That's the acronym for the Israeli Reform Movement. And I can tell you, I'll try to be as short as possible, Leah. I know that we're over time already, but I'll do my best. And so I was in a place called Lubbock, Texas, on December 27th, when I got a call, which was 2 days before the government was supposed to be sworn in. I got a call from Ori and Anna, the CEO of the IMPJ, and from the chairperson who leads the steering committee of the IRAC, the lay leader of the IRAC, saying, you know, there's a protest being planned on the day that the government is going to be sworn in, on the 29th of December. The organizers of that have invited us to join. We think it's the right thing to do. they need our decision within 2 hours to put our name on the banner that's going to be at the demonstration. And basically, can you make a decision on that? Well, I thought about it. I was in Lubbock, Texas. I was on a holiday after spending some time in New York on some reform movement issues. And I said to them, go for it. I think it's the right thing to do. And I went to sleep in Lubbock, Texas, and made the mistake of I didn't make the mistake of getting up in the middle of the night, but I got it up in the middle of the night to do what some of us at our age have to do. But the mistake I made was looking at my phone when on my way back to bed, because on that phone were over 100 WhatsApp messages. We Israelis live on WhatsApp, saying from leading rabbis in Israel, how dare we make that decision without conferring with the rabbis? Second, I got from our national council of synagogues, the head of our national council, saying, how dare you make a decision like that? How dare you join a political movement? How dare you don't understand what this is going to tear apart our communities because not everyone supports it. And finally, I took a real hitting from my own board, because they said, this is something that you can't make a decision on by yourself. You had to bring it to the board. So I didn't go back to sleep, and I wrote a long a letter explaining why I had made that decision, why I accepted the positions of some of our friends of Ori, Anna, Ronen, explaining that these are there's nothing more than our real values. At that stage already, we knew of before the government was sworn in what their plans were. The IRAC had put together a document describing 11 different matters of public policy that the government already planned to implement. Some of them affecting us directly: conversion issues, funding issues, other issues. But further than that, I'm just going to close a window behind me because there's a lot of noise coming out. I don't know if you hear it. I live not far from where there's a public concert going on. So forgive me for a second. You're seeing live. You see me running live on TV. So I said that was the right thing to do. And I said, I understand that there's a problem and that some of the communities and that there's pushback. And I understand that the board needs to be on board, and the board got on board very quickly. I can tell you, friends, now that all 54 of our communities are on board now. There's still some people who don't believe in it, some people who don't want to come out to the protest, but we from day one, and we are the only religious organization, institution, movement in the state of Israel that from day one was part of this protest movement. We are the only movement that from day one is having Havdalah services before protests in several of the cities around the country. 100 and 150 people joining us in Jerusalem. Last week, there was tens of people joining us in Tel Aviv. We have services in Ra'anana, in Modi'in, in Haifa, and other places around the country. We have people from our communities. I get the biggest kick out of seeing on a Saturday afternoon, the people from Kibbutz Lotan going down from the kibbutz, down to the junction just outside of the town, just outside of the kibbutz, and there's 12 people and a dog standing with signs and a flag at that junction in the middle of the Arava on the way to Eilat. It just moves me every time I'm anew. And it's not only there. What else do? We realize at one lull in the protest, just before Pesach, we questioned where things were going. And we realized that we have IRAC as an incredible a team of gifted lawyers and advocates. And our board said we're going to continue to protest. We're going to continue joining the protest, but we're going to take into account the things that we're best at. And that is the thought that besides the protest, we have to think of where we take this movement moving forward. There is more and more talk within Israeli society about starting to craft a constitution for this country. Maybe it's a wish list. Maybe it's something that we can only believe in the days of the Messiah. But the board tasked IRAC and Ori and the folks there to put together a document that talks about which will form the future chapter of the Constitution that will deal specifically with religion and state. I can give you, and it's been put together. Last night we had a discussion in another forum about three specific elements of that chapter that we talked about. But I can give you some of. We talked about what is conversion? How should conversions be dealt with? What is the importance and what is the nature of Shabbat in a Jewish state? How Shabbat should, what do we expect to happen in Shabbat? Where does religion come into national and military service? Who is required to serve and who is not required to serve? But there's many others, the principles of equality, freedom of religion and conscience, separation of religion and state, providing religious services, marriage, burial, educational institutions, government support for Torah institutions. We've crafted a document that I am, for now, except for those three chapters, specific chapters that we've already translated, it's a fabulous document in Hebrew. We're going to speak to our rabbis about it. Our rabbis are interested. They want to be part of the discussion. They understand the sensitivities. We understand that we don't have our rabbis behind us, and they're now completely behind us. I hope that, Dana, you agree with me about that. In the communities around the country, we have more and more people taking part from within our movement. I want to talk about, go back to the movement and the demonstration movement as it takes place right now. I see a lot of there's terrible things going on. You know, Dana spoke about things, Ori spoke about things, Gilad spoke about things. You know, the racism, the Smotrich deciding that yesterday, this is, Dana mentioned it, to nullify 300 million shekels of government support for Arab municipalities, saying that it's more important that other folks get that money. Okay, with the entire cross-section of the government saying that almost everyone else in the government, and certainly in the opposition, say that is unacceptable. But he is a justice minister, and he decided to do that. I mean, those are terrible things. That is racism. That is policy. We have another minister who decided that she is in charge of national parks, and she's going to segregate some of those parks so that men and women can't enjoy those parks together. There will be women's sections and men's sections, something that is unheard of. Where, like Iran, here is Iran. It's not Iran, it's Israel, folks. Okay, those are the battles that we're going to continue. It's not only the judicial coup that Ori mentioned. There are many battles going on. I can give you and the issues of the occupation and what's happening and the slow annexation through making Bezalel Smotrich the deputy defense minister. And I could give you, from my previous life, a whole lecture just on that. But I want to talk about some of the silver linings. We folks have reclaimed the flag, the Israeli flag. We've reappropriated it. You know, for years, the only people walking out with flags on their shoulders were the folks going through East Jerusalem and the old city on Jerusalem Day. Okay, the people coming in, swarming into the city from the settlements around Jerusalem. So that's one thing. We have reappropriated the flag. I have a kit, my demonstration kit in my car. Leah knows it, including the flag and for the South Africans here, the vuvuzela. Okay, I have a vuvuzela that I use at each demonstration. Okay, that's one of the silver linings. The other silver lining is young people. Young people are out there leading these protests. You know, we think about people, you hear about people all lining up to get foreign passports to move out of Israel. The young people are leading us. They're drumming, they're pushing, they're fighting, they're willing to get arrested, and they're getting arrested, and you have lawyers lining up to help them get out of detention. Okay? It's remarkable. People are off the fence. People for years sat on the fence saying, I've had enough of politics in Israel. I don't want to deal with it anymore. I'm not going to vote at the Knesset election. Okay, it's not, doesn't matter. My vote doesn't matter. People have gone off, have stepped off the fence. They're taking part in negotiations. People who never demonstrated in their lives. I know people who have never demonstrated are demonstrating. Hundreds of thousands of people to come. I go to I go to the demonstration in Tel Aviv. I live in Jerusalem, or in Jerusalem. It's a remarkable thing to see that different people from different areas of our society, particularly I might say in Jerusalem, Orthodox people who believe that Israel must remain a democracy, that some of the things that this government is trying to push forward are unacceptable, that they're pulling the country apart, that we must work together. And lastly, I want to talk about our part of it. I joined Leah and a few rabbis at a service at the Kotel, at the Western Wall about, what is it now? The time runs quickly, about 2 weeks ago. It was Rosh Chodesh. It was the evening before the unreasonable clause was supposed to come to the Knesset. And we said that it's important that we show our religious position by going to the egalitarian section of the wall. And we were there with about 100 folks, both conservative and reform, run by 2 women rabbis, incredible service, very moving. But from there, we moved up from that egalitarian section into the upper plaza above the regular Kotel. And who were we joined by? By hundreds upon hundreds of Israelis, regular Israelis with their flags, reclaiming not only the Kotel, not only the flag, but the Kotel as well, saying this is part of who we were. We were the ones who fought for this Kotel in 1967. This is ours just as much as the ultra-Orthodox rabbis who think that that is an ultra-Orthodox synagogue. Making this battle not only a battle for democracy, but about the Jewish nature, the Jewish, the way Judaism is practiced in this country. I think that there's a lot of promise moving forward about those things. So there's a lot of things to worry about. I worry about them. I worry about my children and where their place in this country are. But I believe that there is I like to say that I like to see the half a cup this one is less than half full because I've been drinking this Coke. But I believe in the half a cup that's full. And I think that there's a lot to be said. And lastly, I want to say to you, I want to echo the things that Gilad said. This is it's easy to say, we're going to lean back. We've had enough of Israel, this Michigan country. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to deal with this crazy government. We don't want to deal with the ultra-Orthodox. We don't want to deal with the fact that we as progressive Jews are not accepted. This is the time, folks, not to lean out, but to lean in. This is the time to write to your members of parliament. This is the time to join those unacceptable protests outside of places where in Paris, and I see Michelle here, and I see people, and I see Ben from Rome, who has been very active. I see Alan from San Francisco, who's been very active in the Bay Area. I don't know all of you, but people who have been out there on a Saturday and Sunday afternoon joining the demonstrations against the government ministers who are visiting in that area, or going to standing outside the consulate, or writing letters to their congressmen or other politicians within their own country. Folks, this is your battle not as much as it is ours, but it's your battle too, because this is the only Jewish state we've got. This is the only Jewish state that you've got, and you've got to be part of this battle. So I invite you to do anything you can to help us. Okay, and I know that you're doing it. I know that you're concerned. Lean in, do not lean out. Your kids need to lean in. The youth movement of Netzer and Nifty and the other, they need to lean in as well, and they want to be part of it. They understand that this is important. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you who have been in. I know that it's not easy. I hear from people say, we don't criticize Israel. It creates anti-Semitism. Folks, this is not criticizing Israel. This is criticizing the government of the state of Israel. You're doing something for Israel when you're protesting today, when you're writing that letter, when you're voicing your concern. Folks, this is the way that you can help us here in Israel, to help the movement here in Israel, but to help your brothers and sisters living in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yair. And at this point, I think I have to say an extra special thank you really to Yair, who's really my demonstration buddy. He did not sleep in Gansaka. He drew a line under, but we did walk together to Jerusalem that last Saturday walk. We didn't quite walk all the way from Tel Aviv, but we did walk from Motza. It's quite a steep hill up, and it was very, very hot and sunny. And thank you really for your leadership.
Lea has been an incredible trooper in the time that she came to for holiday and for this mini sabbatical. I don't know whether Aaron is still here. You should give her that. She should start her sabbatical when she leaves Israel. Okay.
I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair. We're not going to go there, and I don't think it's fair on our wonderful emeritus rabbi either. Who probably has to pick up the slack as well. I can see there is at least one hand raised. I want to be respectful. If you're not able to stay, then do drop off. And I want to say to Yair, please do drop off. He does need to get other things done this evening, he told me in advance. So thank you for being with us, Yair. I can see the first question from Paul. There is also the question about the Constitution. Maybe Ori can say a little bit more about that. But Paul, I think you should now be able to unmute yourself.
I have. Thank you, Leah. I'd just like to make a little story and then ask a question. We went to meet some friends of ours who went on a Aliyah about 7 or 8 years ago who are Orthodox last weekend. They see things very differently from the way that we do. He sent me an article from what is a blatantly far-right journal called JewishPress.com, which seems to blame, it's got a conspiracy theory that IRAC has been planning this whole thing for 3 years to depose the right. Anyway, the problem is that a lot of people believe this rubbish, and this couple, who are intelligent people, do believe this nonsense. Is there much, with all the demonstrations that we're doing, what can it achieve unless this government can be deposed, either probably at the next election, and make sure that there are enough votes to actually put in a centre-left government? Because that's what we need. The problem is they've got so much power, they can almost do what they jolly well like, despite all the protests. Is there enough of a movement within Israel to actually do that, to actually vote out the majority of the far right and to actually get a centre-left government? Can that be achieved?
So I will let Ori probably speak to this. I just want to say quickly, there have been polls and they currently don't have a majority anymore. Ori probably knows the numbers much better. And I think one of the interesting things is I almost had an embarrassment of riches for this call, because one of the town mayors of Hod HaSharon heard about this call and said, I'll join the call too, because the municipal elections are also coming up. And maybe Ori could speak to both the polling and also to the municipal elections. By the way, we promised we'll just do a separate call with the mayor of Hod HaSharon another time. So Ori, maybe you could help with that one.
Well, that's really funny what you said, Paul, because whenever I go out on a demonstration, my youngest son asks me the exact same question. Why are you going to demonstrate? What good is it going to do? They are in power now. They can do whatever they want. So how is it going to help that you're going to demonstrate? And truth of the matter is that when we started these demonstrations off in January, we did not think that things will look the way they do today. We did not think that these demonstrations will last for so long, for so many months, and with such big appearance of people every week. It is really unprecedented, I think. And I think that what we managed to do with those demonstrations is remarkable, because if those demonstrations were not done, then I think things would have been a lot worse. They would have gone all power on and just it would be a lot different right now. And the fact that they have to consider their actions and they have to be postponed with all this process is a great achievement for us. And I don't think that eventually they will be able to promote this this coup, because a lot of people, and we see that, as Rabbi Lea said, from the polls, do not support this move. Even people who voted for this coalition are not in favor of what they're doing. So I think we have a lot of hope, because we have a lot to work with, and I think we're heading for a good future. I think it will be a good future. I think that if we didn't do it, things would have been much worse. And regarding the municipal elections, that's something that we also have to fight. This elections will take place on October 31st, and as we hear all the time, we know that Otzma Yehudit, the extreme right-wing party, is doing every possible effort on its behalf in order to promote candidates that support their racist agenda, and we are doing whatever we can in order to fight it. And we get support from our communities around Israel, and we also check the background of candidates in general in order to submit petitions in order to disqualify them and disqualify lists, because in municipal elections, it is not possible to disqualify candidates as it is not in municipal, but in the general elections to the Knesset. It's a bit of a different procedure, but the causes are the same. So we look forward for this elections, and we hope that the candidates from Otzma Yehudit will not prevail.
Thank you. Yair, I think, wanted to come in again.
Yeah, I want to. This demonstration movement is remarkable. I've never seen anything like it, and like Gilad said, people from around the world are coming to understand what's going on in Israel. I don't know whether you get some of the film clips that come out. It's just remarkable. And one of the things that's remarkable, and it's making a real difference, is what's happening within the military. And I think it's important to understand, it has nothing to do with our movement, but it's to understand what's really happening in Israel, is that when you have, our Air Force is based on reservists who volunteer at least one day a week of their lives to continue to take part in exercises to be battle ready at any moment. The talk is that over 1,400 of these pilots have said that they're stopping their volunteerism. Okay, that I read this morning an article in IRAC saying that there's real concern within the military, but specifically the Air Force, about the lack of battle readiness in the Air Force as a result of this, the drop in battle readiness, preparedness. That really takes a toll on Israeli society. Okay, when doctors say that they're going to leave the country, that if the Supreme Court decides that it's on the 12th, as Ori mentioned, on the 12th of February, the 12th of September, the court is supposed to be hearing of the cases against the new legislation about the unreasonableness. And the doctors' union has come out and said that if the court rules against the government, and the government says that it is not going to abide by the court's ruling, it will stop providing medical services around the country. Those are big deals. That is a protest movement that is not only a political, but it is a protest movement. It cannot be something that is ignored by the government. Doctors are saying that if this continues, we're immigrating out of the country. You will not have a medical system in this country. Those are major, you're talking about major segments of Israeli society that not even this government can ignore. And the polls are showing today, if the government today has 64 of the Knesset 120 seats. The latest polls, which, by the way, from week to week show that this government is dropping. It doesn't mean that will happen in elections, but the latest polls as of last Friday was that the existing coalition only has 53. If the elections were held today, they would only get 53 mandates in the Knesset. There's an obvious view about many center-right Israelis saying Netanyahu has lost it. You have to understand that. And what does that mean that he could be brought down now? No, because he has a majority. There's talk about amongst many commentators that some of the members of his government are willing to take us to the brink. That they're messianic. Okay, Yariv Levin, the justice minister, some say is ready for a civil war if we have to. But there's enough sensible people, I hope, in the center right as well, that won't allow that. Even Netanyahu in his weakened state. And I think that is to understand that this is not only the politics of the Knesset, but it's the politics of the street. What's happening in the military. When, by the way, yes, amongst the petitions to the Supreme Court of about the reasonable case is a petition that was submitted by a friend of mine, a lawyer who's a friend of mine, about the implications that this unreasonable case has for Israeli soldiers, because they might be arrested in The Hague, for being war criminals, because the government is no longer investigating issues regarding purported misactions of Israeli soldiers in the West Bank. And as a result of that, the government will then, those soldiers might be subject to criminal proceedings in The Hague. That petition was joined by tens of major security leaders in this country in the last couple of days. The head of the Shin Bet, the head of the Mossad, the former chiefs of staff, major generals in the military. Incredible. There's a real groundswell. There's a sea change here. I think that this sea change will affect the way this government, the way the elections are held in another 3.5 or 4 years. But we have to have the resilience to keep it up until then. And it's not easy. It's remarkable to see people coming out, 20,000 in Jerusalem, 160,000 in Tel Aviv on a weekly basis. It's remarkable. And this is summertime. People are abroad. People were afraid that things would slow down. Netanyahu, I don't know whether this got into the press. Netanyahu went on holiday in a little place in the Golan Heights the last few days. The police closed down the entire settlement in the Golan Heights. Thousands of Israelis enveloped that community, saying with flags. They set up a tent city because the police would not allow them into the village until they petitioned the Supreme Court demanding that they be allowed into the village to be able to protest outside the hotel where he's staying. And the government capitulated, the police capitulated, and as of yesterday evening, there's protests outside of that hotel. It's remarkable. What's happening here right now, as it's unprecedented, and we will, in the end, have the upper hand. I don't know how long that will take, whether we'll have to take some setbacks, and there will be setbacks, because there are enough messianic crazies within this government that are dangerous. But I think that there's enough people of sense that will move us forward in a way that maybe we can find solutions to some of the problems that we have. We will have to find some compromises as well. And that is to your friend who read that article in the Jewish News or whatever it was that you mentioned. Sorry, I was wrong about that.
No, please don't apologize. I want to be respectful to everyone because we're now at 90 minutes. I can see there's still 2 hands up, but I want to take a short moment to thank everyone who I need to thank, and to also allow our Israeli speakers, where it's already getting late, to drop off the call. I'm very happy to stay on to answer the last few questions if I can, or make sure you'll get answers afterwards.
Leah, I have to go, so I will say good night, and because I have
good night, and thank you to
tomorrow.
you, Yair. Thank you to Rabbi Danna Sharon for joining us. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you, Ori Narov, for joining us, and for everything you do, and for being really there to help us with a very clear overview, very important. In his absence, we're going to thank Rabbi Gilad Kariv, member of Knesset for Avodah, for joining us. I put in the chat the links to how you can sign up to the IRAC newsletter, where you will get up-to-date information, as well as a link on how you can donate. And Rabbi Danna Sharon has kindly put us also a link with information for Rabbis for Human Rights, if you're interested in more on that. I want to also thank my wonderful colleague, Rabbi Emma Gottlieb, from South Africa, not only for being my fearless co-host and being amazing with spotlighting, but for actually initiating this call by saying, can we have something in a time zone that suits us, South Africa? So thank you for allowing the rest of us to piggyback onto South Africa. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you to all of you for joining our call. If you want to sign off, please feel free to sign off. Otherwise, I'm going to stop the recording at this point as kind of the official ending. As soon as the Zoom recording will make itself available, I will try to make it available and get the link to you. But for now, I'm going to